LinkedIn News.
What changes in your life if you become more persuasive?
Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, this is In The Arena, a podcast exploring human potential. I'm Leah Smart, and every week you'll find me right here in conversation with bright minds and brave hearts, learning how we can improve our lives and our world by transforming ourselves. So the words negotiation and conflict have historically given me a pretty icky vibe. For a long time, I associated both with struggle, endings, losing, or even that wafy momentary feeling of victory when you do, quote unquote, win the argument. But in the last few years, I decided to jump into my resistance to conflict. I realized that my associations were actually historical and not current, and that conflict is an opportunity to strengthen relationships with friends, colleagues, family, your boss, while also getting a sense of how strong and how much trust that relationship has. In my exploration of negotiation and conflict, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've also made a lot of progress. So as we're wrapping up the holidays and starting the new year, I'm thinking about what it means to approach conflict in all areas of our lives with the purpose of bettering ourselves and, as my guest Kwame Christian puts it, to find the goodness on the other side of every difficult conversation. Kwame is the CEO of the American Negotiation Institute and author of multiple books about how to rethink what conflict and negotiation actually mean. And I'm really excited for you to hear this because he's made me think differently about approaching any meaningful conversation where you or the other person want something, which is every conversation. So whether you run away from, run towards, or freeze in the face of conflict, Kwame is breaking down what it's about and how to improve yourself and your relationships through changing your mind about what it means to win. Here's Kwame.
I want to change the world one difficult conversation at a time. And so for me, growing up as a people pleaser, I know how it feels not feeling comfortable advocating for yourself. And so when I discovered negotiation, not only was it empowering for me, because I learned that this was a skill, not a talent I could learn, I could get better. So for me, every time I negotiate and resolve a conflict, it's a vote in favor of who I want to be. But then for me, I also get even more value from sharing that with other people. And so our motto at the American Negotiation Institute is, we believe the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. So for me, my mandate is very clear. I just want to help as many people as possible just have that same kind of empowering revelation.
I love that. What are the most difficult or what are the most important negotiations you've had in your life?
It's the personal conversations. Those are the most difficult, but also at the same time, the most important. And so I think it's helpful to get an operational definition down for negotiation. So the way that I define negotiation is anytime you're in a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something. And so you could see I'm trying to rebrand negotiation and make it a lot more approachable to help people to realize that we're negotiating every single day. So for me, the most important negotiations are the ones that I have with my family members. So for example, for me as a lawyer, I'm married to a doctor, we just had a young kid. How do I convince my wife that quitting my job and starting the American Negotiation Institute at age 27 is a good financial decision, right? That's a tough one, but very important. So there are a number of these types of everyday conversations that are conversations of consequence, but we often don't identify them as negotiations. And since we don't identify them as negotiations, we don't have that important signal to use the skills that we're probably going to talk about in this podcast. And so I think there's an awareness issue. So for me, the biggest and most important negotiations that I have are always going to be the ones with my family.
So Kwame, a negotiation is any conversation where somebody wants something?
Yep.
Is there ever a conversation where somebody doesn't want, where like both people don't want anything?
Now you're getting it. Yeah.
So a negotiation is every conversation.
Every conversation. And pretty much every conversation. There are going to be some low-level conversations like, hey, what do you think about that movie? Right? We probably shouldn't approach that in terms of like, no, I need you to see it my way with this movie. Come on, now you're just an annoying person, right? But for most conversations of consequence, the looking at it as a negotiation is a very valuable overlay. So I think, is negotiation a skill? Yes. Is negotiation a tool? Yes. It's all of those things. But for me, more so than anything else, it's a life philosophy. I filter every human interaction through this lens, and it helps me to be a lot more intentional about the way I interact with people and how I go about building relationships.
So talk to me about this. So I think about the phrase, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? How does this come into play with negotiating? Like, are we always trying to win, or what are we trying to get to here?
Yeah, you are always trying to win. And here's how you can win every negotiation. This is the value bomb, Leah.
Secret.
This is what I'm going to drop. So you can win every negotiation, but you have to think about winning very, very differently. So this is the way I think about it. I'm winning in a negotiation if I'm putting myself in the best position to succeed and I'm improving throughout the process. Those are things that are within my control, right? So I can only do the best that I can. I'm not going to win them all. I'm not always going to get exactly what it is that I want. But my only responsibility is to bring the skills and mindset and tools to the table that put me in the best position to succeed. And then we'll see where things go. And then at the end of every conversation, I want to look at myself as my own coach. I'm going to replay the tape. What did I do well? I want to do more of that in my next negotiation. What did I do poorly? I want to do less of that next time. And your goal is to not make the same mistake twice. So if you are putting yourself in the best position to succeed and you are improving through every single opportunity and taking each conversation as an opportunity to practice your skills, then you're winning. And so going back to what you said, you could either be right or you could be happy. You could also either be right or you could be persuasive. Right? Because when you think about an argument, what are you trying to do in an argument? You're trying to win, but how are you trying to win? You're trying to win by beating the other person, and you're creating a scenario where your winning necessitates their losing. So you're trying to lord your intellectual and moral superiority over somebody else in order to beat them. You might ultimately be right, but will you be persuasive? Did you change their heart and mind? Did you build the relationship? Most likely not. So if you approach it through the lens of argumentation, where winning necessitates their losing, there's probably no true path to victory other than momentarily inflating your ego, but suffering the consequences for the long term.
You are such a lawyer, Kwame.
You see that? it comes out every once in a while.
I can tell. I love it. So I want to go back to something you said. I'm going to preface this with, I'm someone who always errs on the side of peace. And for me, when I was younger, that meant I erred on the side of not making any waves, of not ever really establishing my needs, of not saying what was important to me. In my mind, a negotiation was equivalent to an argument or conflict, was then equivalent to potential ending of a relationship or making waves that were so big that it wasn't worth it. So in my mind, it was like, well, if I do this, then I'm putting the relationship at stake, and the relationship, whatever it is, whoever it is too important to put in that place. So like what you're saying to me, if you would talk to me about this 2 years ago, I would have been like, no, like not doing it. While the rest of my family is like the exact opposite. So I say this because I think a lot of us are probably like this. We're always trying to figure out like, how high do the stakes have to be, and what are stakes that make it important to get into a conversation where there's a negotiation or where I'm being persuasive to change someone's heart or mind?
Yeah. So to this point, remember, like I'm a recovering people pleaser too. And so with every piece of content that I create, there's me talking to the audience, but also me talking to the older version of myself as well. And so I started to think about conflict as an opportunity. And so that mindset that you were describing, the goal there is to preserve the relationship, because we see the conflict as a risk. But instead, if we decide to look at conflict as an opportunity, then we'll actually lean into it. So the challenge I put out there is try to finish this sentence. This conversation is an opportunity to what? Because when you think about it through just a human-centered approach, we're thinking about approach versus avoid. When we're looking at different situations, we're always looking at it through that lens. If we focus on that, the risk, we're going to see it as a threat, and we're going to avoid the conversation. So that opportunity-based framework, that lens, is important because it'll cause us to lean into the conversation. So first we have to have a mindset shift. And then we have to think about what's the opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to solve problems. It's an opportunity to strengthen relationships. There are tons of opportunities. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity to test the relationship. And this is something that takes a while to fully appreciate, because not all relationships are good for us. And sometimes the reason why we're afraid to lean into the conflict is we're afraid of what we'll find, because we might find out that this is not the right relationship for us. So for me, I've learned that I need to figure out how I can use this conflict to improve my position in life, not specifically in this relationship. Because if I think about how can I keep this relationship, then I might be actually advocating for a relationship that is best left forgotten, right? And so I think there's a lot of introspection that needs to happen first. The first person we have to negotiate with is with ourselves. But a lot of times people don't take that important step. And then they end up advocating for deals that should have never been made and relationships that probably should have been ended.
Ooh, that hits. I felt like I was getting a badge of honor historically for keeping all my friends, for like never having fights. I was always that. I've been that person. That's like part of my identity. And the first time I had an experience of losing a friend, it was devastating. It was like crumbling, because it rocked my sense of my own identity of being able to keep the peace. But what I didn't realize is what you just said, which I was not going inward and saying, what is this relationship doing for me?
Exactly. And going back to what you said about keeping the peace, we have to remember that not all peace is created equally, right? So we have positive peace and we have negative peace. And so a lot of times when we're trying to keep the peace, we're keeping a negative peace where we're intentionally avoiding the natural tension that needs to happen through the difficult conversation. And so we're deciding not to have these conversations in order to avoid the conflict, not in order to make things better. And I had to go through the same thing, Leah. Like when I had to get rid of friends or fire people, I had literally needed therapy, literally months of therapy, because for me, I realized that I had an underlying belief, also known as a cognitive distortion, where I said, if I'm a good friend, then I don't lose friends. A good friend doesn't lose friends, right? And if I do, then that's an indictment of me. But then I started thinking about my relationship portfolio, just like a stock, right? So I have a portfolio of stocks, and I want to make sure that the overall value of those stocks is high. But when you think about the Pareto principle, 80-20, right? 80% of the value is going to come from 20% of the stocks and vice versa. Same with the people in your lives. And so 80% of the problems are going to come from 20% of the people. And then you realize, wait a second, some of these stocks need to go. Some of these stocks need to be, we got to sell these stocks off, right? And so then when I started thinking about the overall quality of all of my relationships, then it helped me to become more okay with letting go of the bad ones too. And that's a really important mental health choice to make. So of course, there's a strategic value to ending bad relationships, no doubt. But I think the thing that's most valuable is recognizing that conflict resolution is an opportunity to identify and remove malignant relationships with minimal damage, therefore improving the overall portfolio value of your relationships. And it's a really tough pill to swallow sometimes. But again, that goes to that self-negotiation. You have to be able to persuade yourself in order to adopt these new beliefs.
So you're living what you're sharing, which I think is fantastic. And you've mentioned therapy, which, by the way, I want to just plug, I think is really important. I didn't grow up in an environment where therapy was something my parents talked about. I didn't feel like that was something that was even really allowed. And I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about the people who I know. I'm thinking about the people where relationships have ended. And I'm thinking about how valuable it could be to have someone else sit in your space and watch you negotiate with yourself so that you can then do what you need to do to get rid of those, malignant relationships. And I'm also just wondering, Kwame, like, because we're both sitting here talking about this and you're living your work, like, what's knocked you on your ass in this work?
Man, it feels like everything, Leah. I think that's the thing that's been most surprising to me, because again, cognitive distortions. I always thought that once you get to a certain level, things will get easier. And what I found is as you get to that mythical level, things just keep on getting harder and more challenging. So I think doing the work, like showing up, doing keynotes, presenting, doing the podcast, those type of things, that's fun. That's easy to do because I'm really passionate about it. People leadership, like running my own company, the business strategy and the things that I have to do, the decisions that I have to make. A lot of times I have to disappoint people. right? The things that make the people pleaser inside of me cringe. Like those are the hardest parts where I have to disappoint people. And the higher that I get in this industry and the more people who want to do business with me and the more people I ultimately have to disappoint. Like that's the hardest part, to just keep on going, because that it's heavy. And I think it's the heaviness of making day-to-day business decisions that was surprising to me, because the work is easy. The business side is tough.
You remind me of, I think I talk to people about like the nature of healing. I think we all come into this world with a specific set of things that we have the opportunity to shift about ourselves. And if we want to, we can. And we're presented with lessons over and over again where we can do that. I think a lot of assumptions, and I made this one, get made that when you get better or you work through it or do the work, that all of a sudden it gets easier. And the way I explain it is it's actually more like, I think of it as like training a boomerang, It's like you send the boomerang out, and the first time you do it, the first time you like have that difficult conversation, the first time you set that boundary, the boomerang's out there for a year. You know what I mean? And then like over time you keep going and the boomerang starts getting trained to figure out where you are. It comes back faster and faster and faster. But I think the big piece of what you just said is like, you still have that little part of you. We still have that part of us that wants to make people happy, or, for you, people pleasing. For me, it's keeping the peace. It doesn't go away. It just gets easier to work through because you know what you're experiencing.
Exactly. And you're able to make better reads because you will feel things, but you don't always understand what it is your body's trying to tell you. Or you might feel it and then make the wrong decision, right? So I think about a concept I call people-pleasing pressure. So it's like, all right, I'm in the middle of a negotiation or difficult conversation. Somebody wants me to do X, but I want to do Y. But in the moment, X seems really, really good. And I feel like this pull toward to do X, where beforehand, I didn't think that was the right answer. But now in the presence of this person, now I think it's right. What's going to happen after the conversation's done? I'm still not going to think that's the right answer, right? It's the draw to please the person who's in front of me. And so for me, I know now when I feel that in the moment, I don't make any decision that I didn't plan on making beforehand. I'm okay with changing my perspective, but I'm going to slow it down, and I'm going to make the decision maybe the next day when you are not in front of me, right? And so it's, again, recognizing just what your tendencies will be, understanding what you're feeling, and making better reads in the moment. But I think the point that you made is really important. It's always going to be there. Like, it's not going to disappear. And so it's important to recognize you're going to need to continue to do the work, right? So if we have a personal trainer and we say, all right, I exercised for a month, so I should be good for the rest of my life, right? That's not really how exercise works. Same thing with your brain. It takes maintenance.
So what you're bringing up in my mind is this concept of like power over versus power with. But I certainly know there are people in the world who come from the angle of like, if I can overpower this person, then I can win, right? And I know we talked a bit about this, but I want to know, like, how do you relate this to your recent book about race?
Yeah, so I think we have to recognize that when it comes to these sensitive issues, it's going to take time. So let's think about the way that somebody believes or thinks about anything, right? So you pick up this belief in childhood. It's been reasserted and reaffirmed by the people who are close to you over the course of your lifetime and the media. And now I have one conversation with one person with a different perspective. Very unlikely. I'm going to override decades of, mental work that was moving me in one direction. I think patience is a really big part of the process. But what ends up happening is people get really impatient and frustrated during the process. And then they start to label people. Well, this person's racist, they're bigoted, those type of things. That's why they're resisting the truth that I'm sending to them. And then we get frustrated and we say, either I'm going to out muscle you in this conversation, or I'm going to completely give up on you and call you part of the problem. And so exactly. And so I think when we think about it through the lens, like you described, of powering with somebody, it's bringing them along for the ride, walking alongside of them and learning from each other. And I think a big part of this is when I think about any difficult conversation is that these difficult conversations, we have to recognize that it should be transformative, not only for the other side, but also for ourselves too. If I go into the conversation and I think about everything the exact same way, I didn't gain anything. Everybody is a genius in their own lived experience. So my goal is to try to get a little bit of that genius. I might not always agree with their perspective and their lived experience, but they have something that they know that I don't know. And so we need to be humble enough to recognize that everybody has some value to bring. And even if we don't ultimately persuade this person, it's a good practice opportunity where you can learn a different perspective and improve yourself through the process. Living in the information age, I think we've gotten a little bit persuasively lazy, where we think, hey, if I just bring enough data and facts, then I can persuade the person. And then we run into this awkward situation where what happens when the facts don't work? What happens then? And so that's a tough situation. And so I think we have to have more realistic expectations, first of all, and then recognize that the context matters. So what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? Like, that's a conversation you have to have with yourself. What do you actually want to get out of it? Because I think if people were to be completely honest, I think a lot of times we're not trying to communicate for understanding, where both parties are engaging in what I call cathartic communication, where we are trying to release our feelings of negative emotions on somebody else to make ourselves feel better and that make them feel worse at the same time, And so if that's what you want to do, at least be honest with with yourself about it. So that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying be real with yourself and maybe start to renegotiate, because maybe that's not the right way to go. But if your goal is to really have meaningful dialogue, just recognize that you're going to need to pack a lunch. It's going to be a really tough situation. So you want to structure it in a way that makes it most likely for you to get the outcome. And I think starting with empathy to show you understand where somebody's coming from has to be the first point. Because usually when we start these discussions, we make it abundantly clear that we do not agree with this other person. But instead, I would suggest changing the approach and start with empathy and let the person understand that you understand where they're coming from. So we have to remember, empathy isn't a concession. It's a necessary part of persuasion.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. But before we go, I want to share one piece of advice I've heard based on research at Columbia University, that movement increases the motivation and likelihood of resolving interpersonal conflict. So that idea you have of going for a walk and talking is a really good one. And if you just think about your own experience, how different does it feel when you're in conflict and sitting across from the other person in a room, at a table, formally, versus walking in the same direction and talking about that challenge? It's just different. When we get back, Kwame talks about how to show up in that conversation, the one where you're walking. And we're back with Kwame Christian on communicating to win, but not the way we're used to winning, the new way.
So at the first part of the conversation, I call it level 1 communication. And the goal is to just understand how they see, think, and feel about the situation, right? I'm not contending what they're saying, right? I'm just trying to get their information. So this is not the point to counter, right? And then once I have proven to them that I understand where they're coming from, then I can move on to the next level of communication, which is persuasion. But a big mistake that people make is they start to persuade too soon. They start talking about where the person's wrong, how they need to change. And the person is saying to themselves subconsciously, how do you know I'm wrong when you haven't even taken the time to show you respect me enough to listen? You don't know, right? And it's usually not the case where somebody is 100% wrong. There's usually some little bit that you can agree with. So the challenge is find that, build some positive momentum and move from there. But I think we just start these conversations in the wrong place where it almost guarantees failure.
Yeah, you remind me of one of the challenges when you're thinking about giving, difficult conversation, negotiation, feedback, whatever you want to call it. When you challenge somebody's identity, it shuts them down. Like if you're saying basically like, I know who you are, or you're not who you say you are, that is the perfect way to get somebody to totally shut down and say it's all wrong. And so one thing, I've heard offered is this idea of truth spotting, which is maybe this person is not 100% right? We know they could be quote unquote wrong, but what 2% could be supportive or helpful for you? Forget about them. Could be supportive or helpful for you. And like it's a way to move yourself out of that like shut down defensive mode.
Absolutely. You remember like in grade school where the teacher in math class would always say, show your work, because even though your answer might be wrong, you can get partial credit. Like that's the way we
Yes.
should look at these conversations. I'm going to look for places where I can give you credit. And so I'm not going to say like that, I disagree with that and that and that and that. And now they get super defensive, right? But no, Leah, what you said made a lot of sense. I especially like the part where you said XYZ, right? And I'm going to focus and expand on the positive. You're generating momentum. Like momentum is this concept that exists almost everywhere, but we can't really fully understand it. But in these conversations, it exists as well. But if we start off the conversation at the point at which we disagree the most, we don't have any positive momentum to build off of. So I think like thinking about it that way, finding some credit that we can give them is going to be really powerful.
Yeah, you're kind of making me think like, it's like positive piece and negative piece. There's the idea of like the positive momentum and the negative momentum. And if two people can come together for the purpose of sort of a positive momentum, there's so much more we can all do together versus building the negative momentum, which generally results in an energy suck. And it's kind of like, when going back to the idea of do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? It's like, do you want energy or do you want it to be taken away? I think sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of being in an argument with someone and winning the argument that we forget that like the biggest thing for us to do is to grow, to learn, and to figure out how we want to show up in the world. And so like we kind of lose the perspective of who we are and who we want to be. So if you could give somebody advice for how to just start the process of negotiating with themselves before they go out and, try this out on other people, what would you say?
Yeah, so this is something that I've spent a lot of time on, Leah, because I want to, with my approach, I want to give something that people can actually use that's simple and practical. So the approach is called compassionate curiosity. So I started that with the first book, Finding Confidence in Conflict, really expanded on it in the second book. So it's a 3-step process that allows you to use it for the external negotiation, but also the internal negotiation. Same 3 steps. So step 1 is acknowledge and validate the emotions. Step 2 is get curious with compassion. And step 3 is joint problem solving. So we can see how this can be a nice little cycle through for the actual conversation with somebody else. But let's talk about how it applies internally. So we're going to acknowledge our own emotions, beliefs, potentially biases, and conclusions, right? So what am I feeling? So I'm feeling angry. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deeper with that analysis because anger is usually a secondary emotion, not a primary emotion. There's usually something else that sparks it. So I'm feeling embarrassed. Okay, what else? Yeah, I'm feeling offended. And then we list all those things, right? And I can go into the psychology if you'd like.
I've heard this saying that anger is fear's bodyguard. So like the way that I think about it, I know I was like, I'm taking that, love it. But like the way that I simplify this, and some people will love it and some people won't. There are so many emotions that we all feel, but most people don't know how to categorize their emotions, right? What I tried to do for a while before I really got more into this work was like, is what I'm doing about love or is it about fear? Like, which one is it? And that simplifies because in my mind, I'm like, yes, anger can be, and I want you to go into the science because I'm fascinated and I think it's incredibly important for us to have real definitions for things that we're trying to describe in the world. If we don't have real definitions, we can't communicate, or we're communicating in a way that we're not being received. So like anger is the emotion of feeling like something perhaps unjust has happened, right? Like that's a very legitimate thing. But like you said, it's a secondary emotion. So tell us about the psychology.
Yes, this is exciting. Okay, and so remember, the psychology applies the same way internally and externally. So what you'll recognize is that if you're experiencing an emotion that generates from the amygdala, both positive and negative emotions come from the amygdala. The other part of the brain that we want to pay attention to is the frontal lobe. This has our prefrontal cortex. This is where we have higher level thinking, emotion management, executive function, logical thinking, those type of things. That's in the frontal lobe. But there's an antagonistic relationship between those two brain structures. So the more emotional you are, the less clearly you're thinking. The more clearly that you're thinking, the less emotional you are. It's an either or proposition. So one thing that I like to say is that it doesn't make sense to send a message to a person who is not psychologically ready to receive it. So think about what we talked about before with being right versus being persuasive, 2 different things. So you could say the right thing at the wrong time and it won't work because the person isn't in the right mindset. So once we see an emotion, like the specter of an unproductive emotion in somebody else or in ourselves, we need to address that first and foremost. And so it's the same approach. So label the emotion. The reason why we do that is that the amygdala feels the emotion, but the part of the brain that actually determines whether or not the label is correct is in the frontal lobe. And so by labeling the emotion in yourself and in others, you need to think about it, or they need to think about it, whether it's internal or external. Is that the right label? And so they're trying to apply a label that calms them down, that calms down the emotionality. That's the psychology behind it. That's why it works. And so once you've labeled those emotions in yourself, focusing on the internal side, then you get curious with compassion. So you're going to get curious with self-directed compassion, because a lot of times our internal voice can be our worst critic. So we need to make sure that we're directing that compassion to ourselves and figure out why it is that I'm feeling this way. What led me to feel this emotion, and dig deeper. Okay, so I said I'm embarrassed. Why am I feeling embarrassed? Well, I'm embarrassed because I'm at the dinner table with all of my family. This is supposed to be a good time, and this person's calling me out like I don't know my stuff, right? That's embarrassing. Okay, what else is frustrating you, right? And so you go deeper and you explain those things to yourself. And then the next step, joint problem solving. Internally, this is reconciling the differences between our hearts and minds. So what would satisfy us emotionally, and then what would satisfy us substantively? So what will satisfy me emotionally? Taking this pie and throwing it in their face. Okay, cool. That'll satisfy your emotion. Is that the right answer though?
I want to eat that pie, so no.
Exactly. So no, I don't want, that's not the right answer. Okay, what else would satisfy you emotionally? Well, I also want to make sure that I could look back on this interaction and respect myself for the way I handled myself. So I want to make sure like that box is checked, but I want to make sure that I address this, because I wouldn't feel good if I let this go. So I should have the conversation. So like you're going through and negotiating with yourself in this process. And now this is a skill. It will seem kind of cumbersome and laborious the first few times, but I'll tell you a trick. If I'm in the middle of a negotiation or a difficult conversation and I start to get triggered, I'll go through this process, but I'll tell the other side, hey, can you give me a second? I want to take a few notes here. You've said a lot of important things. Sometimes, depending on how mad I am, Leah, I am not even writing anything. I'm just turning this into like
or it's a short couple letters.
So, yeah, exactly. WTF. Yeah, right. But it's like I'm giving myself this like 5 to 10 seconds to just go through this process and then settle myself and then come back to the negotiation. So I think having like an actual methodology and framework for the internal negotiation as well as the external negotiation, it helps you to actually commit to doing the internal negotiation when it matters.
So tell me, because, this is a process, it's a practice. And so now people have this 3-step process they can use to think about how they negotiate with themselves and with other people. Of course, we're all going to mess it up. How did you mess this up when you started going, and how'd you fix it?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important things to remember. There's no such thing as a perfect negotiation. Your only goal is to be effective. That's it, and you don't need to be perfect. So you will make mistakes. And I think what's really impressive about the just human interactions in general is how resilient they are to mistakes, because there is no such thing as a perfect interaction. And so I'll catch myself like falling into certain traps, but then I need to just say, oh, hey, I went the wrong way. Let me refocus, recalibrate. So let's say I'm having a conversation and the person brings up something that I don't like. I disagree. I get emotional. Now I want to argue. And so the person makes a point. I make a counterpoint. And then they make a point. And I say, Kwame, didn't you write 2 books about this? Let's settle it down. And so so what I would do is I'll say, okay, hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying X, Y, Z, right? Cool. And then I'm going to go deeper. I'm going to give them the opportunity to share their piece, and I'm going to show that I'm going to understand. So I think the mistakes that I make are just the normal human mistakes. I start to lose focus of what I'm here to do in the conversation, and I get pulled into that argumentative trap. But I think it's really important to recognize, hey, you can recover in these conversations. It's about pattern recognition, recognizing that the direction, like the momentum we talked about, is going in the wrong direction, being aware of that, and having the humility to recognize, listen, I want to go toe-to-toe intellectually with this person, but that's not the way to go. So I'm going to take a little bite of humble pie, and I'm going to slow it down, and I'm going to show the person that I respect them by taking the time to listen and show them that I'm listening. And I think about this in terms of conversational leadership. So leaders are people within a conversation. And so for me, I say to myself, I'm going to take the first step to show you how to negotiate. Okay, yep, you see that? That was an argument. You want me to argue with you. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how we negotiate here. I'm going to credit you for the point that you make. I'm going to summarize. I'm going to prove that I heard you. And I'm going to ask another question because I want you to know that your great points are not a threat to me. I'm going to say some amazing stuff too. And I want that credit. So when that time comes, I want you to be in a mindset where you give me credit. So let me show you first how to give somebody credit. Exactly. And so when you start to think of yourself in that way, you start to feel a sense of pride in the way that you're conducting yourself. And you won't feel like it's a concession, like, oh, I'm letting them have one over on me. No, your focus is on being effective. And we know this methodology is effective.
A lot of people that listen to this show may or may not be leaders in their organizations. They may be on their way there. They may be doing things that are totally different. They may be leading companies, whatever. There's a large spectrum. But I think the more we think about the leaders of our own lives, the better off we all are, right? So like, it doesn't really matter what your title is, because I know a lot of people have the title of leader that are not leaders, and a lot of people who don't have the title that are, right? So that I would follow. So one of the things, though, that I heard about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, which speaks to my tendency to avoid or to leave conflict, is that leaders stay. Leaders stay. And in this context, when I think about the way we might choose to understand ourselves and understand each other, the way we might choose to approach negotiations and having positive peace with the people we care about and with ourselves, is about, are we willing to stay? And staying isn't just sitting in the argument and being in the blow up and like continuing to blow it up. It's like, am I willing to stay in my own discomfort, in the discord that we have? Like, it's hard. It's like, to your point earlier, the work is hard, but leaders stay. And there's something really amazing that happens if you stay a little longer. You learn about yourself, and you learn probably about the other person or other people in a way that humbles you, but also like opens you up to holding more empathy for people around you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we have to remember is that persistence is part of the persuasive process, right? And a lot of times we want to get that quick win. Oh man, Leah said something brilliant. I am forever changed, right? Very rarely, very rarely is that the case, right? And so you're right. Leaders do stay. You have to stay in that discomfort and just recognize that you're fighting for the greater good. And that's the thing. And I think a lot of times we have to sacrifice our own comfort in order to do the right thing for our team and for ourselves.
Okay, so Kwame, I want to know, so I'm not a fan of New Year's resolutions, but people go into the year thinking about what they want to change, what they want to keep the same, how they want to grow. With the work that you're doing, if you could add one thing to the list of what people are writing down that they want to create in the new year, what would you say?
I think it would start with a question, like, what would your life look like if you could be more persuasive? What would your life look like if you were more effective in these difficult conversations? And so for that whole new year, new you type of thing, I would say, consider what things change for you when you start to lean in and have these difficult conversations, and then just resolve to get incrementally better. It doesn't need to be any kind of like massive change, right? It's just saying, listen, after every single conversation, I'm going to ask myself, what could I do better? And what did I do well? And I'm going to try to get incrementally better over the course of the year.
Love that. All right, Kwame, I'll have you complete these 3 statements. Better humans are.
I love this. Better humans are better negotiators.
Better work is.
Fulfilling.
And a better world has.
Positive peace.
Love that. Thank you so much for being on the show. I loved getting to meet you and I need to take all this in. I need to sit.
I love it. Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. This was fun. I appreciate the invitation.
That was Kwame Christian. If you can't tell, I loved our conversation. He's the CEO of American Negotiation Institute and author of Finding Confidence in Conflict, as well as How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race. Check out his podcast, which is part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network, called Negotiate Anything. And one big thing before we go, there was a powerful longitudinal study done at Harvard over 75 years to understand what makes a good life. And what the researchers discovered among the over 700 participants was that the number one predictor of a good and long life was the quality of our relationships. If our relationship quality is strong, we are likely to live healthier, longer, and more satisfied. So consider what you haven't said to your colleague, your friend, your partner, your family member that could support how happy you both are in relation to one another. and imagine what it would be like to use conflict and negotiation as an opportunity to make them, you, and the interactions between you even better. If this conversation made you want to be brave enough to have the talk, share it with that person you're going to have it with, or someone else who'd benefit from mastering conflict. And help other people like you find our show by leaving us a rating before you go. Even better, write a one-sentence review telling me about how you're looking at conflict differently after hearing Kwame's approach. And as always, you can find me on LinkedIn writing about human potential and meaningful living. In the Arena is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Franz Bowen and Rafa Fariha. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Courtney Coop is head of original audio and video. Dave Pond is head of news production. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks so much for coming on the journey with me, and I'll see you next week.